At Sunday's barbecue, my son threw my steak on the ground and said, "Want meat? Go chew it at the nursing home, you useless old woman." The words stung, but not as much as the fact that he said them in front of everyone. The next day, I packed my bags and sold the house. My phone rang 28 times. He begged for forgiveness. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Tatum, and I'm 69 years old. Last Sunday, my son threw my steak on the ground, treating me like I was a dog. Want meat? Go chew it at the nursing home, you useless old woman. The words hit me harder than if he'd slapped me across the face. I stood there in my own backyard, at my own barbecue, watching the piece of meat I'd been looking forward to sitting in the dirt beside my feet. Cedric stood over me, his face twisted with the cruelty I'd watched grow over the years, but had always excused. His wife, Jessica, laughed, actually laughed. My two grandchildren, 8 and 10 years old, stared at me with the same cold indifference their parents had taught them. No one moved to help me. No one said a word in my defense. I bent down slowly, my arthritic knees protesting, and picked up the steak. My hands were shaking not from weakness, but from rage. Pure, white-hot rage that I'd been swallowing for far too long. "Cedric," I said quietly, brushing the dirt off the meat, "what did you just say to me?" He rolled his eyes, the same gesture he'd perfected as a teenager. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be so dramatic. It was just a joke." A joke? 20 years of being treated like hired help in my own home, and it was all just a joke to him? I looked around at the deck I'd paid to build, the pool I'd had installed for his children who barely acknowledged my existence, the brand new grill that Cedric had demanded for Father's Day, even though he'd never been a father to anyone but himself. This house, this beautiful 4-bedroom house in the suburbs that I'd worked 3 jobs to afford after his father left us. I'd given everything to make sure Cedric had what other kids had: private school, sports equipment, college tuition I couldn't afford. I'd sacrificed my own dreams, my own comfort, my own dignity, and this was my reward? "Get me another steak from the kitchen," Cedric said, already turning away, dismissing me like I was the maid. "And bring more beer while you're at it." I stood there holding that dirty piece of meat, and something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, it was quiet, like a thread finally giving way after holding too much weight for too long. I walked into the house, past the living room where I'd raised him alone, past the photos on the walls of every milestone I'd celebrated while he took it all for granted. In the kitchen, I dropped the steak in the trash and looked around at the space that had been my prison for decades. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the worst time. Last month, Cedric had borrowed my credit card and charged $800 in golf equipment without asking. When I confronted him, he told me I was being selfish, that I should be grateful he still visited his crazy old mother. 6 months ago, he'd moved his family into my house temporarily while they looked for a new place. That was after they'd been evicted from their apartment for non-payment of rent. Jessica had immediately started rearranging my furniture, throwing away my things, treating me like a guest in my own home. I'd been cooking their meals, doing their laundry, babysitting their children while they went out to dinner and movies. When I asked when they might find their own place, Cedric had laughed and said, "Why would we move? This setup works perfectly." For them, it worked perfectly. I walked back outside with a fresh steak and another beer, just like the good little servant I'd become. Cedric took them without a thank you, already complaining about something else. As I sat in the cheap plastic chair he'd given me, while he lounged in the expensive patio furniture I'd bought, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done. I was done being invisible in my own life, done being treated like a burden by the child I'd sacrificed everything to raise. Done pretending that this was what family looked like. That night, after they'd all gone to bed in my house, eaten my food, and left their mess for me to clean up, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list, a very important list. By morning, I'd made 3 phone calls that would turn Cedric's world upside down. He had no idea what was coming. The first call I made was to my friend Martha's son-in-law, who happened to be a real estate agent. It was barely 6 o'clock in the morning, but I couldn't wait another minute. I whispered into the phone, standing in my bathroom with the water running to mask the sound. "I need to sell my house today." There was a pause. "Tatum, are you okay?" This seems sudden. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He was at my door by 7:30 with papers and a plan. Cedric and his family were still sleeping, exhausted from their late night of treating my home like their personal hotel. Dave took photos, made notes, and promised me something I'd thought was impossible: a cash buyer within 24 hours. "It's a seller's market," he explained quietly as we stood in my spotless kitchen. "Houses like this, in this neighborhood, they're gold." I have 3 investors who've been waiting for something exactly like this. While my son slept in my guest room, turned into his personal master suite, I was signing papers that would strip it all away from him. See, Cedric had been counting on inheriting this house since he was 25. He'd told his friends, his wife, anyone who would listen, that he was set for life because Mom's got that big house and no one else to leave it to. He'd never worked consistently, never saved money, never planned for his future because he'd assumed mine would become his. For the past 5 years, every major decision he'd made was based on the expectation that this house, worth nearly $400,000, would eventually be his safety net. He had no idea that I'd already updated my will last year after watching him treat me like garbage during Christmas dinner. He had no idea that his name had been removed from everything months ago. But more importantly, he had no idea that I was about to remove him from my life entirely. By noon, I had an offer, full asking price, cash, closing in 72 hours. I accepted without hesitation. While Cedric lounged by my pool, complaining to Jessica about how I'd overcooked the lunch I'd prepared for them, I was in my bedroom quietly packing 38 years of memories into boxes. I kept the photos of Cedric as a child, before he'd learned to see me as an ATM with legs. I kept my mother's jewelry and my father's books. I kept the quilt my grandmother had made and the small collection of ceramic angels I'd been gathering for decades. Everything else I left behind. Dave had arranged for a moving truck to come Wednesday morning, the same day as closing. I'd already put a deposit on a small 2-bedroom apartment across town in a complex that didn't allow long-term guests. Perfect. Tuesday evening, Cedric finally noticed something was different. "Mom," he called from the living room, where he was sprawled across my couch, eating my food and watching my television. "There's some weird paperwork on the kitchen counter." My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "Just some insurance documents, honey. Nothing important." He grunted and went back to his show. Even when his entire future was crumbling around him, he couldn't be bothered to investigate. That was Cedric all over. He assumed everything would always work out because it always had, because I'd always made sure it did. Wednesday morning came like Christmas morning in reverse. The moving truck arrived at 8 o'clock. By the time Cedric stumbled out of bed at 10:30, most of my belongings were already loaded. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, standing in my emptying living room in his underwear and yesterday's t-shirt. "I'm moving," I said simply, wrapping my last ceramic angel in bubble wrap. "Moving? What do you mean, moving?" "Moving where?" "To my new apartment." The color drained from his face. "Apartment? Mom, you can't move to an apartment. What about the house? What about us?" "The house is sold. Closing is in 2 hours." I'll never forget the look on his face, pure panic, like a child who'd just been told Santa Claus wasn't real. Which, in a way, he had been. "Sold? You can't sell the house. We live here." "You live here," I corrected him, taping up the last box. "I've been imprisoned here." Jessica appeared in the doorway, her face already calculating. "Tatum, let's talk about this reasonably. You're obviously upset about something. We can work this out." For 20 years, Cedric had been training for this moment without knowing it. Every time he'd taken my kindness for weakness, every time he'd pushed my boundaries and found no resistance, he'd been building toward this day. The day when he'd finally pushed too far. He just never imagined I might push back. The new owners will be here at noon, I said, handing my keys to Dave. I suggest you start packing. My new apartment felt like a sanctuary, 2 bedrooms, a small balcony overlooking a garden, and complete silence. No one demanding meals. No one leaving messes for me to clean. No one treating me like I was invisible. For the first time in 20 years, I ate dinner when I was hungry, not when someone else expected it. The phone started ringing at 6:47 p.m. I watched Cedric's name flash on the screen and felt nothing. Not guilt, not sadness, not even anger anymore, just peace. I let it go to voicemail. Call number 2 came 15 minutes later. Then another. By bedtime, he'd called 8 times. I slept better than I had in years. Thursday morning brought a fresh wave of desperation. My phone buzzed constantly. When I finally checked, there were 12 missed calls and 7 voicemails. Mom, call me back. We need to talk about this craziness. That was the first one, still trying to sound like he was in control. By the 5th message, his tone had changed. Mom, please. The new people want us out by tomorrow. Where are we supposed to go? The 8th message was Jessica. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Tatum, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You know we love you. Call us back so we can fix this. I deleted them all without listening to the rest. While Cedric was having his breakdown, I was discovering something wonderful. My new neighbors actually saw me as a person. Mrs. Chin from next door brought me homemade cookies and asked about my life, my interests, my thoughts. When's the last time anyone had cared about my thoughts? Mr. Rodriguez from downstairs helped me hang pictures and insisted I call him Roberto. You remind me of my mother, he said with genuine warmth. Strong women who raised good families deserve respect. If only he knew how wrong he was about the good family part. Friday brought calls 13 through 20. Cedric's messages were getting increasingly frantic. Mom, they called the police. They're treating us like squatters. You can't do this to your own son. We had to sleep in the car last night. The kids are scared. How could you do this to your grandchildren? Fine, you want an apology? I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for whatever I did wrong. Just help us. But here's what Cedric still didn't understand. This wasn't about an apology. This was about 20 years of systematic disrespect. You can't fix that with a phone call and some panic-induced remorse. Saturday evening, I was watering the small herb garden I'd started on my balcony when Mrs. Chin knocked on my door. Tatum, dear, there's a young man downstairs asking for you. He seems upset. Through my window, I could see Cedric pacing in the parking lot. His hair was a mess, his clothes wrinkled. Jessica sat in their car with the children, probably crying about their crazy grandmother who'd ruined their lives. I didn't go down. Call 21 came at 9 p.m. This time, I answered. What? Cedric. Mom, thank God. Listen, I know you're mad, but… I interrupted him. Mad implies I still care enough to feel anger. I'm done. You can't be done. I'm your son. Are you? Because sons don't treat their mothers like servants. Sons don't humiliate their mothers in front of their own grandchildren. Sons don't steal from their mothers and call it borrowing. There was silence on the other end. I never stole from you, he said. I laughed. Actually laughed. Cedric, you've been stealing from me for 20 years. My dignity, my peace, my self-respect. The credit card was just the cherry on top. Where are we supposed to live? That's not my problem anymore. I hung up and turned off my phone. Sunday morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my door. Through the peephole, I could see Cedric, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I know you're in there, he shouted. Open this door. We need to talk. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and listening to him make a fool of himself in the hallway. Mrs. Chen's door opened. Young man, you're disturbing everyone. If you don't leave, I'm calling security. That's my mother. She sold our house. She made us homeless. Your mother is a lovely woman who deserves peace in her retirement. Now leave before I call the police. I heard his footsteps retreating and smiled. Mrs. Chin was barely 5 feet tall, but she had more backbone than my 6 foot son. That afternoon, as I sat reading in my quiet apartment, surrounded by only the things I loved, my phone rang one last time. Call 28. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear what he had to say now that reality had finally sunk in. Mom, his voice was broken, desperate. Please, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. I'll change. I'll be better. Just please help us. Cedric, I said softly, you had 38 years to be better. You chose to be worse every single day. That's not fair. I made mistakes, but I can fix them. No, I said, looking out at my little garden where tomatoes were already starting to grow. Some things can't be fixed. Some things are too broken to repair. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he whispered, so that's it? You're just going to abandon your family? I'm not abandoning my family, I replied. I'm finally putting myself first. Something you never taught me to do. As I hung up for the last time, I realized something that should have terrified me but didn't. I had no idea what Cedric would do next, and for the first time in decades, I didn't care. 3 weeks of blissful silence ended on a Tuesday morning when I found Cedric and Jessica sitting in the lobby of my building, waiting for me to come back from my morning walk. They looked terrible. Cedric had lost weight, his face gaunt and stubbled. Jessica's usually perfect makeup was smudged, her designer clothes wrinkled. They'd clearly been sleeping in their car. Hello, Cedric, I said calmly, not breaking stride as I headed for the elevator. Mom, wait. He jumped up, blocking my path. We need to talk. No, we don't. Jessica stood too, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well. Tatum, the children miss their grandmother. This has gone on long enough. I looked at her, the woman who'd laughed when my son threw meat at me like I was a dog. Where are my grandchildren now, Jessica? She shifted uncomfortably. They're staying with friends. You mean you dumped them on other people because you're homeless? I stepped around them toward the elevator. Interesting parenting choice. Cedric followed me. Mom, please. Just 5 minutes. Let us explain. Against my better judgment. I stopped. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I wanted to see just how far they'd fallen. Fine, I said. 5 minutes. But not up in my apartment. We can talk right here. We sat in the lobby's small seating area. Through the windows, I could see my herb garden thriving on the balcony, cherry tomatoes, basil, oregano. I'd been learning to cook for one, and it was surprisingly enjoyable. Cedric began first. I want to apologize for what I said at the barbecue. That was wrong. What else? I asked. He blinked. What do you mean? I mean, what else are you apologizing for? Because if you think this is about one comment at one barbecue, you haven't learned anything. Jessica jumped in. Tatum, we know we took you for granted sometimes. Sometimes. I laughed. Jessica, you moved into my house and immediately started throwing away my belongings. You told your children to call me the maid as a joke. You ate my food, used my utilities, and complained when I asked you to clean up after yourselves. Her face flushed red. That's not how it happened, isn't it? I continued. Cedric, remember last Christmas when you borrowed my credit card to buy presents, $800 I couldn't afford because I was already supporting 4 extra people in my house? Cedric looked uncomfortable. I paid you back. No, you didn't, I said, shaking my head. You promised to pay me back. There's a difference. I leaned back in my chair, feeling surprisingly calm. Let me guess why you're really here. You need money. You need a place to stay. You need your old mom to bail you out one more time. They exchanged glances. Bingo, Cedric said. We just need a little help getting back on our feet. Maybe you could, he suggested, I don't know, take out a loan against your new place? Jessica added quickly, or you could ask the people who bought the house to sell it back to us. I'm sure they'd understand. I stared at them both, these 2 adults who had never learned to take responsibility for their own lives. Do you know what I did with the money from selling the house? Their eyes lit up with greed. They thought I was about to offer them a lifeline. I gave 1/3 of it to charity, I said, watching their faces fall. Specifically, to organizations that help elderly people who are being abused by their own families. Cedric's mouth dropped open. You gave away my inheritance? Your inheritance? I stood up, my voice rising for the first time. Cedric, you haven't inherited anything because you haven't earned anything. Inheritance is for children who love and respect their parents, not for parasites who see their mothers as walking ATMs. That's our money. Jessica shrieked, no longer bothering to hide her true nature. No, you were tenants who never paid rent, I corrected. And now you're trespassing. I started walking toward the elevator, but Cedric grabbed my arm. Mom, what about the rest of the money? I shook off his grip and looked him in the eye. The rest of the money is mine. I'm 69 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm going to spend money on myself. On what? He demanded. Travel, nice dinners, books, a comfortable retirement where no one treats me like garbage. I pressed the elevator button. Things I should have been doing for the past 20 years instead of supporting ungrateful adults. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. As they started to close, Jessica called out desperately, "What are we supposed to do?" I met her eyes as the doors slid shut. Learn to take care of yourselves. Upstairs, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my balcony. My phone rang twice, but I didn't answer. From my second-floor window, I could see Cedric and Jessica in the parking lot, arguing. Their voices carried up, and I caught fragments of their conversation. "This is all your fault," Jessica was screaming. "You said she'd never actually do it. She's lost her mind." Cedric shot back. "She'll come around. She has to." But I wouldn't come around. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do. I was reading books I'd never had time for, trying recipes I'd seen on cooking shows, taking long walks without worrying about when I'd need to have dinner ready. Mrs. Chin knocked on my door with a container of homemade soup. "I saw those people bothering you today," she said gently. "Family troubles? Former family troubles?" I corrected, accepting the soup gratefully. "They're not my problem anymore." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Life's too short to let people drain your happiness, even if they're related to you." As I heated up her delicious soup, I realized something profound. Mrs. Chin, who'd known me for just 3 weeks, treated me with more kindness and respect than my own son had shown me in decades. Maybe blood wasn't thicker than water after all. Maybe family was something you chose, not something you were stuck with. That night, I slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of quiet contentment, and that Cedric would have to figure out his own tomorrow for the first time in his life. 2 months had passed since I'd seen Cedric in my lobby, and I'd started to believe he'd finally given up. I was wrong. The first sign was a handwritten letter slipped under my door, not an email, not a text, but actual handwriting on actual paper. Cedric had never written me a letter in his entire life. "Dear Mom," it began. "I've had time to think about everything, and I realize now how badly I treated you. I want to make things right." The letter went on for 3 pages, full of apologies and promises. He'd gotten a job, he said. He and Jessica were in counseling. They'd found a small apartment and were learning to be responsible. The children missed me terribly and asked about their grandmother every day. It was beautifully written, sincere-sounding, and complete nonsense. I knew Cedric. I'd raised him, and I knew he'd never learned to sustain effort for anything difficult. Admitting fault was the hardest thing for him. This letter? Just another manipulation. Probably Jessica's idea. But I was curious. How far would he go to get back into my good graces? How committed was he to this act? I decided to find out. I called him that evening. "Cedric, I got your letter." "Mom," his voice was filled with relief and hope. "I was hoping you'd call. Did you believe it?" "I'm willing to give you a chance to prove it," I said. "But it won't be easy." "Anything. I'll do anything." "Good. I want you to come here Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. Bring work clothes. Mrs. Chin next door is 83 and needs help cleaning out her garage. If you're really sorry for how you treated an elderly woman, you can start by helping another one." There was a pause. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. Okay, he said finally. I'll be there. Saturday morning came and went. Cedric didn't show up. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed not in him, but in myself for hoping he might have actually changed. At 10:30, my phone rang. Mom, I'm so sorry, Cedric began. Jessica had a migraine, and I had to take the kids to school. Then my car wouldn't start. Cedric, I interrupted. It's fine. No, it's not fine, he rushed. Let me make it up to you. I'll come tomorrow. Tomorrow is Sunday. Mrs. Chen goes to church and visits her sister on Sundays. Then next Saturday? Next Saturday works, I said. Same time, 8 o'clock. He didn't show up the next Saturday either. This time the excuse was that he'd been called into work. The Saturday after that, one of the children was sick. By the fourth Saturday, I stopped expecting him, but I was curious to see how long he'd keep making excuses. So I kept giving him chances. It was on the sixth Saturday that he actually appeared at my door, looking sheepish and carrying a cup of coffee from the expensive place down the street. I know I'm late, he started. 3 hours late, I corrected. But I'm here now, he said, offering the coffee. I brought you coffee. That vanilla latte you used to love. I accepted the coffee, but didn't drink it. Mrs. Chen finished cleaning her garage 4 weeks ago. Cedric, her son, came and helped her. His face fell. Oh well, he said, shifting uncomfortably. Maybe there's something else I can help with. I studied him for a moment. He looked tired, thinner, but not broken. His clothes were clean, and his hair was styled. He wasn't sleeping in his car anymore, which meant he'd found somewhere to live without my help. Actually, there is something, I said. I've been volunteering at the community center, reading to seniors who can't see well anymore. They need more volunteers. His expression brightened. That sounds perfect. I love old people. I almost laughed. Cedric had never shown any particular fondness for elderly people. If anything, he'd grown impatient with me as I'd aged, rolling his eyes when I moved slowly or repeated myself. Great, I said. They meet Tuesday mornings at 9 o'clock. I'll let them know you're coming. Tuesday morning, his smile faltered. I usually work Tuesday mornings. You said you'd do anything. I know, but I can't just skip work. I need this job. Then maybe Thursday afternoons. They have a group that meets then. Thursday afternoons, I pick up the kids from school. I nodded slowly. What about evenings? They have a dinner program for isolated seniors. You could help serve meals. Evenings are family time, he replied. Jessica thinks it's important that we eat dinner together as a family. I set down the untouched coffee. Cedric, in the past 5 minutes, you've told me you can't volunteer Tuesday mornings, Thursday afternoons, or any evening. When exactly are you available to prove how sorry you are? He shifted uncomfortably. Well, I mean weekends. I could do weekend stuff. You've missed 6 Saturday appointments. That was different, he said, defensive. Those were emergencies. Really? I asked. Because from where I sit, it looks like helping others will always be your last priority. Just like respecting me was always your last priority. His face flushed red. That's not fair. Mom, I'm trying. Are you? I snapped. Trying means showing up when you say you will. Trying means making sacrifices for other people, not just expecting them to make sacrifices for you. I stood up, suddenly tired of this whole charade. You know what, Cedric? Don't worry about the volunteering. Don't worry about proving anything to me. What do you mean? He looked at me, confused. I mean, you've already proven everything I needed to know. He left that day, frustrated and confused. I never saw him again, not because I was hiding from him, but because he finally understood that I meant what I said. The truth was, I didn't need his apologies or his promises. I'd already found something better than his grudging attempts at respect. I'd found people who respected me naturally, without having to be begged, tested, or convinced. Mrs. Chen still brought me soup twice a week. Roberto had started inviting me to his family's Sunday dinners. The seniors at the community center lit up when I walked into the room, genuinely happy to see me. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued my presence instead of just my usefulness, and that felt like the greatest victory of all. 1 year after I left my old life behind, I found myself standing in the hospital room of someone who had become more precious to me than my own son ever was. Mrs. Chin lay in the narrow bed, looking impossibly small beneath the white sheets. At 84, she'd suffered a stroke that left her unable to care for herself. Her only son lived in Seattle and couldn't move back to help her. "I don't want to go to a nursing home," she whispered, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "I just want to go home." I looked around the sterile room, thinking about how Mrs. Chen had welcomed me with warmth from my very first day in the apartment building. How she'd brought me soup when I was sad, shared stories about her late husband over tea, and never once asked me for anything except friendship. "What if you didn't have to?" I said quietly. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean? What if you came home with me?" The idea had been forming in my mind for weeks. Ever since Mrs. Chen's stroke, my apartment had 2 bedrooms, and I'd been rattling around in there alone, sometimes talking to my plants just to hear another voice. Mrs. Chen needed someone to help her with daily tasks, and I needed someone who saw me as more than a walking checkbook. "Tatum, I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," I replied. "I'm offering." And so, 2 weeks later, Mrs. Chen moved into my spare bedroom. I helped her with her medications, drove her to physical therapy appointments, and made sure she ate nutritious meals. In return, she filled my apartment with laughter, shared her incredible stories about immigrating to America as a young bride, and taught me to make dumplings that were better than any restaurants. It wasn't a burden. It was a blessing. The transformation in both our lives was remarkable. Mrs. Chin regained most of her strength and independence within 6 months. I discovered that caring for someone who appreciated my efforts felt completely different from being taken advantage of. Roberto's family officially adopted me as an honorary grandmother. His children called me Abuela Tatum and actually listened when I spoke, hanging on every word of the stories I told them about growing up in a different era. At the community center, I'd become the coordinator for the reading program, organizing volunteers, and developing new activities. The seniors there had become my extended family, people who celebrated my birthday, asked about my health, and genuinely cared about my happiness. One evening, as Mrs. Chin and I sat on our balcony watching the sunset, she asked me something that made me pause. "Do you ever miss your old life?" I considered the question carefully. "I miss the idea of what my old life could have been," I said finally. "I miss the son I thought I had, not the one who never learned to respect me." "Any regrets?" "Only one," I admitted. "I regret waiting so long to put myself first." That's when I noticed him across the street, partially hidden behind a tree. Cedric stood, watching our building. He'd been showing up periodically over the past few months, never approaching, just observing. At first, it had made me nervous. Now, it just made me sad. "Is that him?" Mrs. Chin asked, following my gaze. I nodded. "He still thinks I'm going to change my mind. That eventually I'll get lonely enough or guilty enough to take him back." "Are you?" she asked. I looked around at my life, Mrs. Chin reading a book in the chair beside me, the sound of Roberto's children playing in the courtyard below, my herb garden thriving in planters along the balcony railing. Tomorrow, I would volunteer at the community center. And tomorrow evening, Mrs. Chin and I would cook dinner together while she told me about her late husband's terrible jokes. "No," I said with absolute certainty. "I'm not." Mrs. Chin smiled. "Good. Because family isn't about blood, dear. It's about people who show up for each other." As if to prove her point, Roberto appeared on his balcony below us, calling up, "Ladies, my wife made too many tamales again. Should I bring some up?" "Always, Mrs. H," Mrs. Chin called back, laughing. I watched Cedric across the street, still lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to need him. He had no idea that I'd never been less needy in my entire life. 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be living with an elderly Chinese woman who wasn't related to me, having dinner with a Mexican family who'd claimed me as their own, and spending my days helping other seniors find joy in their golden years. I would have thought they were crazy. But here I was, surrounded by chosen family who loved me, not for what I could give them, but for who I was. People who respected my opinions, valued my experiences, and never made me feel like a burden. Cedric finally walked away that evening, disappearing into the darkness just as the streetlights came on. I realized, as I watched him go, that I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, not even pity. He was just a stranger now, someone who'd once been important but had chosen to make himself irrelevant. Mrs. Chin reached over and patted my hand. "Come on," she said. "Roberto's bringing tamales, and I want to show you the photo album from my grandson's wedding." As we headed inside to our warm, welcoming home, I reflected on something profound. I'd spent 68 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. At 69, I'd finally learned to recognize love when it was freely offered. And I had never been richer. The last thing I saw before closing the balcony door was my reflection in the glass. I looked different now, lighter, younger somehow, despite being a year older. The face looking back at me belonged to a woman who knew her worth, who had found her place in the world, and who would never again settle for crumbs when she deserved the whole feast. Some people spend their entire lives searching for family. I was lucky enough to find mine at 69, and it was perfect. Now, I'm curious about you, who are listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites and will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.